Okay. She's been with Samaritan's Purse for a good while now, and Mary Lou has obtained her basic nursing degree at Lutheran Hospital School of Nursing in St. Louis, Missouri. She went on to get her Bachelor of Science in Nursing at East Carolina State and Master of Science in Nursing at the Advanced Practice from Johns Hopkins University. My alma mater, so we're looking forward to hearing from her. Since November of 2006, Mary Lou has been a health advisor for Samaritan's Purse. Her work has taken her to Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. And prior to this position, she worked for many years as a nurse and then a nurse practitioner at Johns Hopkins in the Adult Emergency Department. From 1999 until 2006, she took leaves of absence from her position and, in the emergency department to travel to numerous countries to work in the health sector. Prior to this work, Mary Lou worked in numerous positions utilizing her skills and knowledge as a nurse, both clinically and in management. And today her subject is one that very definitely needs addressed out in the world, and that's gender-based violence manifested as female genital mutilation. Mary Lou.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to be able to talk to all of you. I wish that we didn't have to have this session. I wish that this procedure was eradicated from the face of the earth. Smallpox has been eradicated. We've made great strides in almost eradicating polio. Guinea worm is fast becoming eradicated. Those are all natural occurrences. Female genital mutilation or cutting is not. It's a man-made issue, and that's what we're going to talk about today. It's a little bit uncomfortable to talk about this because it's not a pleasant subject, but I would feel absolutely guilt-stricken if I did not do so because of what it does and the ramifications of it. I'm not going to show graphic pictures. I'm not going to have you listen to graphic sounds of the girls going through the procedure. If you want to see those and hear those, all you need to do is go onto YouTube and you can see those things. Basically, I'm going to talk a bit about some background, the different forms, what it causes, what has been done, and what can be done. The first picture is three little children that we were working with in Liberia. There was a project to teach their mothers how to use local foods to feed the children. You can see those beautiful little girls and so innocent and sitting there eating their food. It just reminds me of the innocence of youth. Female genital mutilation has also started to be called female genital cutting. I personally don't like that term because it's much more than that. Another term that's been used is female circumcision, and that's actually not an accurate term either because circumcision is actually more related to what men have done to themselves, and the procedure of FGM, and I'm going to shorten it to FGM, is much more extensive than simply circumcision. What's the definition of FGM? It's a procedure that will intentionally and permanently alter injury to the female genital organs without any medical reason, without any health benefits, and in fact, quite the opposite. It includes procedures that will partially or completely remove the female external genitalia, and it can be done as early as an infant being a few days old or up to 15 years of age. I've even heard of it being done on women right before their marriage because in some cases a man will not marry them, in fact many cases, unless they've had the procedure. As far as history, it's a little bit hard to find a lot of history about this procedure. We don't know absolutely where it started from. We know that it predates both Christianity and the Muslim faith. Supposedly it appeared early in Aboriginal tribes in Australia and also during the times of the pharaohs. There's been some evidence of the procedure having been done when Egyptian mummies have been looked at. And there's another thinking that it has also had an early start in sub-Saharan Africa, but we absolutely don't know. We just know that it is old. What you're seeing here is a picture of about 20 or so females in the Beja community of eastern Sudan, where I worked several times. It's called Hamish Korab, and I point this out because these are what the women have to wear. They are unable to see a man that is not their relative without completely being covered. And when they see a man that's not their relative, they will, in addition, cover their faces so that you can see nothing of them. We see them go to the corner, get down in the corner on their haunches and pull their scarves over their heads, almost like they're ashamed. One of our country directors at the time in Sudan went with us to take a look at our village, and when he saw this, he cried. Every single one of these women have had the worst form of FGM. It was 100% done in that community by the time the child was 2 years old. If the child were 3 years old, they might wait a few more months, but it was extensively carried out in that village. The estimates say that there's up to 140 million women living today who've had this procedure. It's also estimated that up to 3 million girls every year in Africa are subjected to this procedure. Way back in 1997, the United States Department of Health and Human Services made an estimate that there were over 168,000 females living in the United States who've undergone this procedure. Now, it's a little bit hard to get these types of statistics because it's very, very private and people don't always like to talk about it. I show you this picture because the woman on the left, the one in the middle, are two of the Beja women that I worked with. They're both dead now. The one on the left was our beautiful interpreter. She died of unknown causes. I could never find out when I went back there why she had died. The woman in the middle died of breast cancer. She had nobody to help her out with that. By the time I saw her, came back from 1 year to the next, the cancer had developed so far there wasn't a lot that could be done. The woman on the right is one of our Eritrean interpreters. All three of those women absolutely have had that procedure. Where's it practiced? Well, we know of 28 countries in Africa where it's practiced, also in the Middle East, in Yemen and Kurdish communities, Saudi Arabia. It is supposedly practiced in some ethnic communities in Central and South America. I'm actually unaware of where they might be. Because of the influx of immigrants coming into the United States and Europe, it is increasing in its prevalence in our countries, both European countries and the United States. This map was put out jointly by the United Nations Population Organization and UNICEF, and it shows you, if you look at the key and you look over to the right, it's where 90 to 100% of the women have had the procedure done. Look at Egypt, look at Somalia, look at Guinea, and then going down a little further on the color spectrum, Ethiopia, Mauritania, and some of the other countries. Now, the two organizations that did this survey were unable to get any statistics from the areas that are in gray, and there was no data recorded on the big gray spot there. But it just kind of gives you an idea of how prevalent it is in Africa. This particular bar graph shows you the prevalence among younger and older women. If you look at the little key there, the darker blue is our ages 35 to 39 of the women that have had the procedure, and then the lighter blue is ages 15 to 19. As you can see, looking at Somalia, 99% and 97%. Egypt, 96%. It's come down a little bit to 81%, and you look at somebody like Kenya and Tanzania, they're really, really tackling the problem and beginning to reduce it and hopefully stop it altogether. This bar graph shows you the trends from two different years. Egypt 2000 to 2008, Kenya 1999 to 2008, and you can just take a look at those and see that it's come down somewhat, but certainly not fast enough as we would like to see them. Chad, it's barely come down at all. And by the way, if you have any questions, please just stop me, and I'd be glad to answer your questions now or at the end of the session. This particular chart gives you the legal status of FGM, and if you look over on the left side, it shows where there are laws that specifically prohibit the practice. Remember, we talked about Egypt, it's in the 90-some%. Well, they have laws that forbid it. Doesn't make any difference. In Sudan, which is the middle one, no specific laws, but some provisions where it's still practiced. There's some provisions for it. Looking on the right side, if you will see Liberia, you know, Samaritans Purse has a pretty big office in Liberia, and it's practiced quite prevalently in Liberia. However, and I'll talk about Liberia in a few minutes, but the Liberian government does not recognize it. They will not talk about it, even though their president is fairly enlightened. She has a PhD in economics from the United States, and Ellen Johnson is her name, but they do not talk about it in any type of public forum. Then you can see other countries where there are laws where we're working, such as Niger and Kenya and Uganda. And there's even laws in Somalia where it's very, very prevalent. So that's kind of an interesting statistic there. Talking about its presence in the United States, like I said a few moments ago, it's a private matter, so we really don't know the exact numbers. Just this year, the U.S. passed a law that amended the old law of transporting women or young girls to other countries to have the procedure done. It's euphemistically called vacation cutting. So what they'll do is they'll take a girl during her school vacation to another country, have the procedure done, because it's, of course, outlawed in the U.S., and then they'll bring her back to the United States. And if found out, it is punishable by up to 5 years in prison in the United States.
Is that ever enforced?
Excuse me?
Is that ever enforced?
You know, I asked that question, and I could not find it when I looked it up because it's so private. They have to, you know, it's very difficult to catch them doing this because for all we know, they're taking their family on vacation. So if I find out that it's ever been enforced, I'll let you know. Okay, this talks about the various types of the procedure so that you can understand a bit about how it varies. The most benign form is where there's just partial or total removal of the clitoris or the prepuce, and basically that doesn't do as much mutilation, but it certainly affects the woman as far as her marital relations later. The next more severe form is there's partial or total removal of the clitoris, both the labia majora and oftentimes the labia minora, so that they're just completely gone. The worst form is the kind that I saw in Hamish Koreab in eastern Sudan, called infibulation. That's where they completely cut everything off and then bring the labia over to close up the opening, the narrowing of the vaginal opening to the point that the opening is about the size of your little fingernail. And if you can imagine what that then creates, and we'll go into that in a minute. And there's a fourth generalized category where they may not go as extensive in the procedure, but they would do pricking, even cauterizing, scraping, etc. But it is not quite as drastic as the other forms just described. Yes?
Who does these procedures?
We'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah. Mary Lou?
Yes.
When a question is asked, would you repeat it so?
Oh, sure. Cindy asked who does the procedures, and I said I'll be discussing that in a minute so that we understand who's involved in them. Here's some additional facts. There you go. They're traditionally done by what are called circumcisers. Currently, 18% are being done by healthcare workers, but this number is increasing. For more extensive procedures, the girl's legs can be bound for up to 2 weeks after the procedure so that scar tissue will form, and she will not be walking during that time. She'll just be lying there, oftentimes away from the village, so that nobody could hear her screams when the procedure was done. Sometimes a mother or father will observe the procedure, and one's first reaction is absolute anger. But you can't do anything to help if you just let the anger to take over. These mothers and these fathers love their daughters. They just think that the daughters will never find a husband if they don't have this procedure done. The infibulation, or the worst form, sometimes on the wedding day of the bride, the woman will be cut open, and that way she'll be able to have marital relations with her husband. And that's not always the case, and there are various ways that the husband consummates a marriage, and I really won't get into those because they're pretty difficult to talk about. Instruments used to perform this procedure are special knives, scissors, scalpels, pieces of glass, and even razor blades that are passed on from one girl to the next girl or teenage young woman. The effects, both immediate and long-term, are multiple. The pain, most of this is done without any local anesthetic, and in fact, again, in that same village, the circumcisers came to us and asked us for our topical anesthesia so that they could do this without the girls hurting us badly. And a decision had to be made about whether we would give it to them or not.
What did you decide?
The question was from Janet is, what did we decide? And I have to say, we gave it to them because it was the worst of two evils. Either way, they were going to do it. I mean, we talked against it, but that's what we did. You know, and sometimes I question some of the decisions I made around this because there were other experiences I've had with it, and you have to do a lot of praying, a lot of asking God, what am I to do in this situation? Tetanus is another complication, hemorrhaging, bleeding. urinary retention. With the worst form, it takes a woman about 10 minutes just to urinate because there's no way that they can have a normal flow. It takes, during her monthly cycle, it takes 10 days for it to go through the cycle with excruciating pain because of the backup of the blood. They can get blood infections, go into shock. They can develop HIV if the circumciser is going from one female to another, and any of them might have HIV. It can cause infertility, definitely difficult marital relations, scarring, and damage to the urethra or the anus. The psychological damage is some of the worst. We worked with this one woman in Sudan, was just a wonderful, wonderful contributing woman, and she's about my age, and every time we talked about it, she would start crying because she could never ever get over what had happened to her. Death is fairly common either from the immediate effects or in childbirth later on. According to the World Health Organization, out of every 1,000 births, up to 17 women died during childbirth if they have had this procedure. I forgot. I'm going to go back just one second. I failed to mention the fistulas that develop, and I believe we have even had a couple of postdoc OBGYNs work in a hospital in Ethiopia to learn about doing the fistulas. Cindy just confirms that. And these women who, if they don't have a repair, they will forever be banned from their villages to either urinate or pass stool without any ability to control it. So that's another really bad side effect of it. I talked about the deaths during childbirth of women, up to 20 deaths for every 1,000 newborns born to mothers who've had the procedure. So you can see it's not without effects during childbirth. This again is a report from WHO back in 2006. So, the question might be, so why do we do this? Why do they do this? A lot of people will say it's a way that women are controlled by the male population. I don't like to think of it that way. I like to think of the fact that they can't overcome this tradition. The whole idea of gender inequality is a huge topic, and we could debate that for days, I guess. But it does put women in an inferior position as a result of this procedure. It's embedded oftentimes in societies in a coming-of-age ceremony. So once this has been done, then the woman or the girl is is eligible to be married in her community. It can involve secret societies, and in Liberia, it's where they have what is called the Sandy Society, and when the girls go off to learn skills about becoming mothers and wives, the procedure is done. And I think there's some fairly good strides toward ending that, because these girls are sometimes taken out of school to go be a part of the secret society. So there's some legislation coming out about the secret societies. It's absolutely entrenched in the social norm of many communities, and is perpetuated by the parents. And sometimes the females more than the males, because they're worried about the marital status of their daughters. And even though it's a violent act, they are not intentionally trying to inflict violence on their daughters. Like I said, it's believed to ensure a female's proper marriage. It's associated with the family's honor. And if people will say, well, it's in the Quran, it is not in the Quran. It's definitely not in the in the Holy Scriptures, in the Bible, there is no religious teaching that supports it. Although many of the lay people think, oh yeah, it is. It's what the Islamic religion teaches. It isn't. And surprisingly, it's also carried out in some Jewish communities and animist communities throughout any religion. There's no one religion. It predates the Islam religion and Christianity. The circumcisers can make a lot of money and have status in the community, and they're usually older women, and that helps to answer your question, Cindy. In Liberia, they're called Zols, Z as in zebra, zero, or O-L-L, Zols. One of our Liberian employees said that her grandmother was a Zol, and she was the richest person in the community, had high status and lots of money. If the families on their own try to stop it, then they are risking marriage prospects for their daughters, and they risk losing status as a family. Here you see 3 women that I worked with in Eastern Sudan. The one on the left is one of the nutritionists. The other two women are our nurses. It gives you just an idea of how women have to dress even today in some of these communities. If you think about it, being a patient and having the woman in the middle taking care of you would almost be a little bit frightening, and sometimes these women even wore black gloves. And we'd have to tell them to take off their gloves so that they could take care of their patients and wash their hands. All 3 of these women, when you got to know them, when we were in a tuco with just all of we women and they took off these outfits, they were incredibly fun, fine people. But all you see is this sort of zombie-looking person, you know, that you can't even see anything more than her eyes, especially the one in the middle. And she was a really fine individual. Wanted to point out to you, there's a woman by the name of Waris Dirie. She's a haute couture, a high fashion model, who was a victim of the procedure when she was 5 years old. She's written the book Desert Flower, talking about what happened to her. She's from Somalia. She got a very severe infection afterwards, and she did recover. I saw her interviewed on Al Jazeera English TV when I was in Sudan, and the interviewer said, "Why is it? Is the reason religious? Is it tradition? What is the reason?" And she looked right at him and she said, "There is no reason." This woman, at the age of 13, took off running one night from her village, ended up finally in London, was discovered for her beauty, and became a model. The reason why she ran away is her father introduced her to a very old man with a beard and a cane, and he was going to be her husband. And she said, "I can't do this. I've already gone through this procedure." It's a picture of her. You can see how very beautiful she is. She's a woman, I think she's in her 40s now. She's become an ambassador for the UN to talk against the procedure. And she's been on shows like Barbara Walters and other shows to talk about it. In order to make it a bit more scientific in trying to find out the extent of it, there are 5 indicators that are used internationally when surveys are done. And the first indicator is to go into a community and find out the prevalence in the age cohort of 15 to 49, and then to ask mothers in that age category of the status of their daughters, if they have or have not had the procedure, and then how much of it is the simply the excision procedure, and how much of it is the closed or infibulation. Who performs the procedure, and then is it supported by men or by women? Because as I said, There are men who are not all that supportive, and then there are women who are very supportive, sometimes both of them. So what can be done to stop it? Well, 2 UN agencies are working in 22 countries to try to eliminate it. Many communities have begun to organize to make a public commitment to stop it, and I'll discuss that in a minute. And they have community conversations. They begin to educate people about human rights in general and what are the fundamental values of adults, adolescents, and religious leaders in these communities. One of the things that works so well is for the communities to mobilize in collective decision-making to stop it. And I don't know if you know anything about social science theory, but it takes a look at norms in a community and takes a look at ways those norms can be changed with a replacement. So that if they have a coming-of-age ceremony, which is the procedure, they could come up with a different coming-of-age ceremony to just put in its place. In these countries where there's legislation, you have to educate people or the whole practice is going to go underground. You see in Egypt, they have laws against it, but it's like 98% done. And just to let you know, faith-based organizations with our, with what the scriptures have taught us about love for one another, for males and females equally, we can play an important role in becoming involved. I'd like to point out one success story I've read about. This woman, Bogalech Gabri, is an Ethiopian woman who had the procedure done to her. She started an organization called Kambati Menti Gazima Top, called KMJ, which means working with Kambati, or women working together. This woman did some of her education in Israel and then went on to the U.S. to get a PhD in epidemiology, Tom. And she nearly bled to death after the procedure. She was 12 years old. Her sister died in childbirth as a result of it. If you look at that last statistic, in her region, she has reduced it from 97% to 3% in about an 11-year period. And this was in Ethiopia in a predominantly Protestant area. So it's a little bit surprising that this is done in a Protestant or a Christian, supposedly Christian communities. How has she or how does she succeed? Like I said, a woman like she can go into a community, can speak with absolute authority about it because this has been done to her, and then she starts to work with the people without condemning them. Positive-deviance strategy is a way that you might look at or have discussion with a woman or a couple who've not had the woman hasn't had the procedure and all the positive effects of it, and then begin to teach people that too could be part of their lives. She has open discussions with people, 2-hour sessions over the weekends, and these discussions have to be done repeatedly. And rather than a top-down approach where an NGO comes in and says, we're going to stop this and we're going to help you, it has to be community-based, community-driven for it to be successful, and that has been proven over and over again. Some other things that she has done is these girls are given silver pendants that say, I am whole. In another community, girls on their own started pinning papers to their uniforms saying, learn from me, I am whole. A particular couple had the courage to celebrate their marriage by announcing that the bride had not had the procedure, and they were both in support of that, both the husband and the wife. They can come up with ceremonies that would celebrate the girl's coming of age without having the procedure, without having a celebration of the circumcision. I remember being in that village in Sudan, and at night when we would try to sleep, we would hear the women making that noise, and sometimes they did that to hide the noise of the child having the procedure. KMG, which is the organization this woman has started, has reached 6 million people in southern Sudan. Doesn't mean that they have all agreed to stop, but it's growing there. Another organization you have maybe have heard of is Toasted. Now, I'm not as familiar with it, but it has some pretty promising results, and they start out by working with people to take a look at ways that you can have positive social transformation. Some of the statistics show that they have stopped it in over 5,000 communities in Senegal, over 528 communities in Gambia, communities in other nations. And what they do is they can work with different tribes who marry off their children to one another and get them talking about it and then helping to stop it. Okay, so what are we doing? We're actually just really at the very beginning of this. We do have a full-time advisor who's part of our program development unit working on gender issues. We just lost the one that we had, and I think we're in the process of hiring somebody else right now. Last year, Sissy Graham and she has an interest in this, and so we went to Kurdistan to visit some government officials to discuss it, and they didn't have a problem. They said they don't do it. So that's sometimes what you're going to hear. Liberia has done the most. They have this project called Advancing the Rights of Adolescent Girls, which starts to look at protection against sexual and gender-based violence for these girls. They have a LIGHT program in a couple of different states where they're taking a look at stopping gender-based violence for women and children, and they're working with the churches. And they also have a full-time child protection program manager who's just recently left. Danielle was her name. She was very good, and now we need to get another one over there. But one of the woman who is running the LIGHT program in Foya, one of the states in Liberia, was jailed for a day for starting to get people to talk about such things as gender-based violence. They said she was disturbing the peace. And in Liberia, to begin to talk about this has to be done very, very carefully. Like I said, the women who do this in Liberia are called Zoles. And they make money and they have status. And there is a head Zole for the whole country. But it's interesting, like I said, there is nothing discussed openly about FGM. So when I interviewed Danielle about, well, what are you doing with this? And she said, my goal during my stay here has not been to stop it. My goal is to get the word out, to begin to talk to people about what it is and what it does. And so the ball is rolling in Liberia. They've got some really brave, both expats and Liberian people taking a look at these gender issues. And it's not only GBV, but it's a fairly high prevalence of assault and other, like intimate partner violence, and they're working on these things, and it's wonderful. Here's a picture of a beautiful little girl. This was in Ethiopia, and I refer back to the smiles and the innocence of these little girls, and what so many of them have had to or will have to go through, and it can break your heart if you start thinking about it. Here are some of the references. You can maybe read through those later. I'm not going to go into that. There's other Bible passages that might support stopping this, but I like what the psalmist says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, I know that full well. So if our Creator has made us so beautifully, why are we going to alter that? What is the purpose? What is the reason? And that's, in my opinion, one thing that helps to drive my interest in this. I ended up by showing you another picture of God's creation. This is the Chesapeake Bay, where I go boating sometimes, and shows you what God has done. Just a couple of things. FGM education needs to become a more integral part of maternal child health program, safe motherhood, and child survival programs. And it's just not to the extent that it should be. And I had a background in gray because until this thing is eradicated, it is gray. It's not bright. It's not bright blue or bright yellow or whatever. At any rate, that's the end of my talk. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them for you if I can.
You can either speak your questions if you have the phone service available to you, or you can type it into the chat window so we can get them to Mary Lou. So the floor is open for questions.
You may find the book Half the Sky interesting to you. It's written by there's other name, but there's one section in there on a lady named Edna Aden of Somaliland who has carried on a kind of a war against female genital mutilation. She is Somali.
Yes, I read about her, but I've not read the book.
You would find this section interesting.
Thank you.
Her father was a doctor. Her mother and grandmother visited her.
So she did not have. She did have the procedure. Oh, they whisked her off.
And,
okay.
There's the feeling that oftentimes it's the women who propagate.
Yes. I'm reading more and more of that. I wanted to mention, and I didn't mention it in the discussion, that in Egypt, it's almost exclusively done by medical doctors, which lends it a certain legitimacy to it. And even though they've got laws against it, it's still carried out almost 95% or so.
In Kenya, the former president, Daniel Arap Moi, his tribe was one of the worst in the country, even in spite of laws against it. But the Kalenjin have extensive circumcisions.
This is Kenya?
Right.
Now, apparently they're doing really well toward decreasing it, so I wonder if his tribe is...
You could ask Bill Rhodes. He would know.
Okay, thank you. I think Lance has a question. Are any attempts made to render anesthesia or pain control during this procedure? I can't imagine how painful it must be. Well, I would imagine in Egypt the doctors would have access to anesthesia. There was a case within the past month of a young woman who died as a result of the procedure because they gave her general anesthesia and they overdosed her on anesthesia. So she died not from, the primitive conditions, but she died from too much anesthesia. And I would say, and this again is a guess, but I would say a majority of the females that have this done, it is done without any anesthesia because they really don't have access. They really don't have access to it, and they oftentimes leave the girl, as I said, away from the community and will just come visit her at night and bring her food, and she has to lie there and suffer and think about what has happened to her. So anyway, no, I don't think so, Lance. Not many attempts.
Mary Lou, I noticed your
your statistic that said the number of doctors was on the rise.
Yes.
Which I thought was an interesting balance, because as more people, as it becomes more unacceptable and more laws are passed against it, I would have expected the
Yes.
rate to fall. Do you have any kind of...
I mean, I could only guess at that. I guess if a community and if a family still believes this is something that has to be done so that the young lady can find a good husband, and they have access to having it done by a medical person, then they would at least want that so the person doesn't have to suffer, such as in Egypt. But no, it's kind of a dichotomy, is it not? Yeah.
Any further questions out there? Mary Lou, we want to thank you. It's very definite, just from listening to the tone of your voice, how much passion you feel about the subject, and that came across very well in your talk. So thank you very much. I know it was difficult, and it's difficult for us to sit here and hear. So just thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda, for the compliment. And thank you, everybody, for listening in.